In this video, we will be taking apart the motor for our early model Singer 99. I'm also going to go over my plans with you for how I will rewire this machine so that it operates either by a knee control or a foot control. Let's get started. So we have a lot going on here. Our goal today is to just disassemble this motor. At the end of the video, I'm going to show you my plans for how all these components are going to work together. The knee control, the light, the motor, and a foot control. Let's start the motor first. So here is the motor as is. This is exactly how I took it off of the machine. I still have the mount on and everything. The first thing I want to do is go ahead and remove the mount from the motor. And you can see here, when we start to disassemble this, we have this funny connection here. This is where the light plugged in originally, as well as these Chicago style connectors. All of this is going to go away. So this screw right here is the screw that's holding the mount onto our motor. So let's take that off first. Little screw. Now the motor mount will just wiggle right off. For this motor and the machine it's going back on, this is not the mount I'm going to reuse, and you'll see later on why. But I'm going to go ahead and set the mount and the screw aside. Now here we have a screw, and it would hold what I believe is called a belt tensioner, but some of the motors would have a belt tensioner on them. I'm going to go ahead and just take it off for now. Also left to loosen. Now, if we look here, we can see we have two sort of covers on the motor. We have a cover here, and it kind of runs around this underside of the motor. And then we also have this metal cover here. I'm going to go ahead and take this cover off first. And they're just left to loosen. 2 screws. Now we can pull this off. Look at that. Diagram shows motor connected for alternating current. To operate on direct current, remove screw X from terminal and insert in terminal D. How about that? Along with some bug stuff. Let's set this little cover aside. Now as we look here, we see where all of our connections are. Some of these connections were coming in for the power light. A couple of them are coming from the field core. The ones that are on the field core, once I inspect the wires and make sure they're in good enough shape, I will leave them as is and I won't resolder them. These other ones here will be replaced. Now I have 2 screws here that I want to go ahead and remove. And this is a strange setup. You may not see this in your machine, but the ones that are screwed on, I want to go ahead and undo. So we have one little brass screw. This one's a little bit harder to get to. And this connection doesn't look like it's in very good shape. I can see frayed wire sticking out. So I'm glad I'm going to go ahead and do this. Now that I have these 2 free, I'm actually going to clip them here and pull them out this way. So bye-bye Chicago style plugs. All of this goes bye-bye. And we just pull those right out. They also go bye-bye. Okay, let's stop for just a minute. I want to talk to you about something really quickly. I haven't opened this motor until I started to film this video, and I read off of this little paper insert inside this cover. This motor is different than what I expected to find. I thought I would only have 2 wires coming out and soldered here. I was fully expecting that, but I had 3. This little paper here explains why. Now, I called my friend Bob Fowler to make sure that I wasn't crazy about the 3rd wire, and he helped me understand that this motor was designed to either work on alternating current or direct current. That's why there's 3 wires, and this little paper explains what you would do to go between one or the other. We use alternating current. I am not going to touch anything here if I can help it. I'm going to leave it as is, and the motor will be set up to run on alternating current. If you do not see a third wire coming out of your motor, and your motor may look totally different on your 99, they were not all the same. But if you do not see the third wire, there's nothing wrong with your motor. I also should say, if you're not comfortable taking your motor apart this far, don't. Have someone you trust look at your electrical wires, especially the ones coming out of the motor, see if they need to be fixed or changed at all to make them safe to operate the machine, and you can leave it at that. The only other thing I would do if I weren't taking this motor apart besides cleaning it up would be removing the brush caps, which we will get to, and using a Q-tip to just get in and maybe clean off a little bit of the carbon dust that's on the commutator. So if you're not comfortable going this far, don't do it. So we've removed this cover, and I've tried to give you a very simple explanation of this little setup right here. Now we're going to remove this other cover, the bigger one with the badge secured to it. There are 2 screws, one here and one here. I'm just going to take those out. And left to loosen, of course. Now the cover has a little bit of bend to it, so I can just kind of pull it out on this side, and I've pulled it off of the machine. I'm setting that with these screws. It looks like the screws for the lower cover here and this band sort of cover are the same. I'm going to keep them together for now. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and remove this pulley because I'm fully disassembling this motor. So right here is a little set screw on my pulley, and I'm going to take that out. Left to loosen. You can take it out all the way. You don't have to if you want to keep those parts together. It should pull off if you just back the screw out a little bit. I'll take this off all the way because I'm cleaning all of these parts. And we'll set this aside. Now this little block right here, I want to be careful with it because it's not metal. It's made of some sort of plastic or resin. However, there are 2 screws here that secure it to the motor. And because I want to try to wiggle this apart at least a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and take these 2 screws out so these wires have a little more freedom to kind of move around. Now, if your motor doesn't look exactly like this motor, I highly recommend checking out Bob Fowler's channel. More than likely, he has a video or 2 on a motor that is like the one you have, or at least very similar. So you see, I've freed this now, just giving myself a little more wiggle room here. But I want to be very careful because these connections, they're soldered. I'm hoping I don't need to mess with them, but it's free. We're also going to remove the brush caps for this motor. Even if you don't fully disassemble the motor, you could do this part. So there'll be a brush cap on each side. There's a brush cap here and here. It doesn't matter which one you take off first. Just be gentle with them, because these break pretty easily. They are made of a plastic, and you'll have 2. So one brush cap, and if I just kind of gently wiggle, I can pull out the brush, and this brush still has a lot of life left in it. I can set that one aside, spin it around, same thing on the other side. Gentle, gentle. And when we put these back, we're not going to crank them down very hard at all. Second brush cap. And I'm just wiggling. If I pulled this too hard, I might pull the spring off the brush. But if I kind of am gentle and wiggle it, generally you can have the whole brush come out without pulling the spring off. If you pull the spring off, you're just going to need some really tiny tweezers that you can get down in there and kind of grab the end of that brush and pull it out. We'll set that aside. And I took these out first before I kind of pull this apart, because once I move the commutator that's inside here out of the way, the brushes would just spring further inside, and that might be hard to get out. So now we have 2 screws that we want to remove that's holding all these pieces together. We have our field core here, we have the pulley end of the motor, and then this end down here where our commutator is. So let's loosen the 2 screws on the top. And I'm just being very careful as I hold on to things with this bar right here, because remember, soldered connections. Left to loosen on both of these screws. And these are longer screws, so might take a second. See that? Only the ends are threaded. The rest of this is just going through this body here. So we have one screw and two screws. They're the same. You don't need to worry about mixing them up. Now, my goal is to get this apart enough that I can get the entire armature and the shaft, the end with the commutator and the pulley end out. That's all one piece. But I really am hoping to not damage these wires. So I'm just going to wiggle a little bit here on the pulley end, and see, it's going to slide right off. Now I want to deal with the grease wick that's here, so I'm going to set this aside because I'm not done with it yet. But the next thing I want to do is to see, can I kind of separate this at least a little bit? Can I go ahead and pull the armature out? And when you're pulling the armature out of a motor this way, when you have these wrapped wires for the field core here, you need to be careful. This wrapping is still good, but it can be brittle. And because this is textured and ribbed on the outside, when you pull it out, you can cut and scrape across that wrapping. You really don't want to do that. It is okay to sort of gently pull it apart a little bit if you need to, carefully pulling this out. There we go. Now, do you see this right in here? This is what I want to be careful not to damage. I don't want to expose bare wire here. Now, when I pulled this out, there are a couple washers on the pulley end. I want to note how many there were. These are spacers, and they keep the armature and all of this shaft and how it fits in the motor from having too much in play back and forth. If it's too tight, it wouldn't spin, but if it's too loose, it would be noisy. So I have a thicker washer and a thinner washer that went on my pulley end. Here is the commutator I was talking about that I want to clean. There's going to be washers on this end as well. And here I have one thin washer. That's it. But look here on the pulley end, here was a third washer stuck. So 3 for the pulley end. And if I look down in here, I can try to see, did I have any more washers? And from what I can tell, there are not any more, just a lot of carbon dust. Now, how important is it for me to break this free? Not too important, but look, just a little bit. That's all the further I want to do it. And the reason why is I do want to get my Q-tips in here and just clean out some of this extra carbon dust, but this is as far apart as it's going. I have these wires coming here from the field core that I do not want to mess with. I'm going to leave them. So I'm just getting it apart enough so I can get in here and clean out the carbon dust. Now, on this little end here, do you see this? That's actually a little cap. I can tap this out with a punch, and I'm going to, because I want to change the grease wicks on this motor. If you cannot get your fingers into this small space, I would not recommend doing this. I can, and so I know I can easily get a new grease wick in here because I have my finger to kind of keep it from going too far, and I'm going to use tweezers to guide it. But I'm doing this as far as I'm comfortable doing it. This is how far. So I think the last thing I will do is go ahead and pop this little cover off, as well as remove the grease wicks from this motor. So I have a nice long punch. I'm sticking it down through this way into where that cap is. So it's coming all the way through and it's hitting this cap here. And I'm just going to kind of hold everything still and give it a punch. Just like that. And here's my little pressed in little end cap. I'll clean it up and put it back when I'm putting the motor back together. Now, how do you get the grease wicks out of here? I use a dental tool and I go ahead and I poke through the end where we would apply the grease to keep the wicks nice and greased up, and I just kind of give them a push. Then using my tweezers, I just work them out the rest of the way. Now, almost always these grease wicks are going to be hard. And if you do not want to replace them, if you're not comfortable taking them out, you should probably at least try to revive them. And you can revive a hardened grease wick by simply putting just a drop of oil down in this port right here. Just a drop, that's all it takes. But when I feel this, especially the end that was pressing up against the shaft, it is hard. I'm replacing this, so I'm not reviving it. Now there should also be a spring down in this port. I kind of felt around and I don't feel one, but even if there were one, I'm leaving it, and I'm just going to use some very fine Q-tips to get in here and clean out that old grease before I put the fresh grease wicks in. So the way I'm going to remove this other grease wick is exactly the same way. Here we go, the other grease wick. So these I will replace, and I'm going to use the same grease wicks that I use for my featherweight motors for this. So now, this motor is disassembled as far as I'm going to take it, and the next step is cleaning it. So let's look at what we took off, and then I will kind of quickly go over my plan for how I'm going to rewire the motors, replace the wires that I cut when I originally started to take this apart, and the rest of the machine. We have this end of the motor housing and the field core here, and our little block that's holding all of our wires from the field core, and then that option for direct current. We have that. We have the end, the pulley end of the motor housing. 2 grease wicks, which I am replacing. You could clean these, or if you didn't take them out, add a drop of oil and revive them first and then add new grease. We have the armature with the commutator end and the pulley end. This is the shaft. We have the washers that went on this whole assembly, one thin on our commutator end. Yours might be different. And then one thick and 2 thin on the pulley end. We have the pulley and the little set screw for the pulley, this little end cap that we punched out for the commutator end, 2 screws that hold all these 3 larger pieces together, 2 brushes, 2 brush caps. These are the 2 screws that I removed for the 2 wires that I clipped that I'm going to replace. The outer cover with 2 screws. This is a cover that has the badge for the motor, and the bottom cover also with 2 screws. This little screw that would have worked with a belt tensioner. And finally, the motor mount and the motor mount screw. Now, what is changing? What's changing is starting with the motor mount. I am putting a different motor mount on that will accept this type of power block, because I wanted to get rid of the Chicago connectors that originally powered the light, the machine, the knee control, all of that. So I need this power block to do that. New motor mount, power block. I will rewire the motor. 2 new wires are coming off, a red wire and a black wire. They will be going to position 2 and 3 on this power block. Then I'm going to rewire this light, and we will take this apart and put new wires coming out of the light. Now I have a replacement light that I have purchased for this machine because this one had a wooden peg installed as part of its switch. I'm not going to deal with that in this series. So we'll be starting with this light, which still needs to be rewired, but at least its switch is working fine. So this will be rewired, also running to this power block. This will be gone. Finally, this was the original knee control. Do you see these little plugs right here? These were for the Chicago style connectors. This is going away. In its place will be a more modern style knee control. It's still vintage. It is not something that I can buy today, but I'm upgrading it away from this form of knee control, which just is really hard to regulate. The way this works, It's not even worth going into. It's going away. This, at least I can disassemble if I need to and adjust it so that when I run the knee control, I can power the machine at, higher speeds, lower speeds. I have control over how fast and slow this machine will sew. So this will have 2 wires coming out of it, also plugging into this power block. When that's all done, the owner will be able to take a foot control, the kind of foot control that has one end that goes power into the wall and the other cord coming out of it is the foot control itself. They can plug that machine in, and then if they choose, they can move the foot control out of the way, plug in the bar for the knee control, run it by the knee control, or remove the bar, pull the foot control back where they can reach it, and run it by the foot control. They'll have both options. So we will go over that, but we took apart the motor. That's what counts. So next video, we will start cleaning up the motor parts here and reassembling the motor and getting that wire portion at least taken care of, because once I have the 2 new wires that I removed back on, I can reassemble this motor. All the rest of the wiring will be outside of the motor and just connected to this power block. Again, I just want to say your motor may look nothing like this one. And this little part right here definitely threw me for a loop. But the good thing is that 3rd wire, don't have to touch it. We can leave it as is. So I will see you guys again really soon. I thank you so much for watching. I hope you take care. Bye.